Oh, white women, why do you think everything is about you? Y'all have willfully ignored and excluded the contributions of women of color to women's rights organizing for way too long, including all those times you chose the patriarchy over sisterhood. Well, not today, white feminists. Not today. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton have been America's feminist darlings since forever ago, launching the fight for equality. Well, for white women. In her speech to the state legislature of New York in 1854, Stanton said, "We are moral, virtuous, and intelligent, and yet by your laws we are classed with idiots, lunatics, and Negroes." And her fellow suffragette leader Anthony once said, "I will cut off this right arm of mine before I will ever work or demand the ballot for the Negro and not the woman." That's right. First wave feminism was hella racist. It fought for white women's rights by arguing against the rights of, as Stanton called them, degraded black men. Black men having the right to vote before upper-class white women? The horror. It gets worse. Not only were black women excluded from the suffragette movement, organizers of the 1913 suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. asked them to march at the back of the line. They were like, "Hey girls, you can hang back for like another 45 years until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Okay, thanks. Bye." Fast forward to the 1960s and 1970s, and this culture of excluding women of color from feminist organizing spaces becomes more multi-layered.
The ways that they're excluded would be in terms of leadership, in terms of which communities are being organized, in terms of which topics are being organized around, as well as which resources are being allocated to kind of make social change.
Dr. Salamisha Tillett is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and the co-founder of A Long Walk Home, a nonprofit that uses art to end violence against women and girls.
Excluding women of color, you're not actually tackling the crux of the ways in which gender equality and racial inequality and economic inequality work in concert with each other.
And that's the key. While white feminists have the privilege to focus on issues like reproductive health, sexual freedom, and wage equality, women of color have had to fight sexism and structural and institutional racism. But that hasn't stopped them. From women like Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells, feminist writers and activists who fought for African American rights in the late 1800s and early 1900s, to Dolores Huerta, the Chicana who co-founded the United Farm Workers Union in 1962 and transformed the labor movement, to Shirley Chisholm, who was not only the first black woman elected to Congress, but the first black candidate to run for the nomination of a major party for the U.S. presidency, to the women of the Black Panther Party, who made up the majority of the organization. Women of color have been smashing the shit out of gender and racial ceilings. They also led and organized marches and campaigns like the original Million Women March in 1997 to protest the economic deterioration of African American communities. And long before celebrities dressed in black to protest sexual harassment, there was Paulette Barnes, Diane Williams, and Michelle Vincent, black women who filed lawsuits against their bosses and shaped the sexual harassment laws we have today. Laws created to protect all women. Don't even get us started on Time magazine's blatant erasure of Me Too founder Tarana Burke from its Person of the Year cover, which was all about the movement against sexual harassment that she started a decade ago. And women of color are still out here fighting to save all our behinds. Thanks to the activism of black women, 98% of whom voted nope to Roy Moore in Alabama, an alleged child molester was not elected to a Senate seat, even though white women overwhelmingly voted for him. You're welcome, America. So why are mainstream feminist organizing circles still leaving out black and brown women's voices and contributions?
Most, I guess, obviously is in terms of leadership, right? So it's not simply like what issues rise to the forefront of women's rights movements, but also who gets to be the voice of feminism. I do think, though, it's much harder for white feminists to identify with the struggles of women of color.
This may explain why when it comes to organizing efforts around things like Black Lives Matter or the killing of black women like Sandra Bland, white mainstream feminists tend to be largely silent. Oh, and when it comes to the gender pay gap with white men, women of color are still trailing behind white women, y'all.
If you're talking about gender equality but not talking about racism, you just don't have effective reform. You can have versions of feminism that don't incorporate thinking about the ways in which people experience multiple forms of oppression. You definitely can have it. Is it as effective? No.
The reality is, to move forward, feminist organizing spaces need to include the issues and leadership of women who are not just from the white, upper middle class, lean-in bourgeois, but those who exist across different parts of American society, starting with the most vulnerable.